So carrying on from the UV basics, I'm going to look at the automatic unwrapping option. So let me break this. So right now we've got these base UV layouts for this cube, which are fine. They do the job. Let's just go in and break this. Let's go in and do a planar. Sometimes what I will do, because if you've done something, say you've been working from a cube and you've been cutting into that and been messing about with it, it creates lots of different seams on there, which we'll talk about seams in a little bit during this tutorial. And to get rid of all those seams, to start from scratch, what it will often do is just do a quick planar map on something, and that kind of resets it, gets rid of all the seams, and lets you make a start on it. So that's just something I do quite a lot. So even if I don't use a planar map in the way that I've been looking at it so far, just to reset the UVs essentially is one way to do it. So I've done that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do an automatic unwrap. So let's click on this and show you what it does. So what this is doing is it's almost like it's doing 6 planar projections at once. So we're doing a planar projection from each face of this cube essentially. Now you can change these options if you don't want 6. You can just go in, and if you shift click on any of these tools, by the way, go into the options for it. So we can change the amount of planes. We can actually increase that or decrease it depending on what you want. I found 6 does a decent job of this though. So we could also optimize it for having fewer pieces, so less distortion on this as well. But I'll leave it at its defaults. Let's just reset this for the time being. Okay. So you can see this has done a good job. It's essentially got where we were, but notice that these are no longer part of the same mesh. And this is another consideration with UV mapping. Each one of these, and you can see with this thicker white line around this, let's click off this. See with a thicker white line, that determines, or that denotes where a seam is. So a seam essentially is where this isn't connected, where we've broken these weld points from the original mesh. So each one of these now is a separate UV island. Now that can be a good thing if you're working with normal maps. Anywhere where we've got a 90-degree angle, you often want to break these apart in this way to be able to stop bleeding from the normal map, bleeding from one face into another face. If you were taking this into something like Photoshop, you wanted to create a texture and you want that texture to wrap seamlessly, and the key word there is seamlessly, around these faces, then having too many seams can be problematic. So essentially, if let's just get that one there, let's just bring this in. So we've got that one, we have this one here. Let me just move these around a bit just as an illustration. Let's have this one here, which is this one. Let's just move these others out of the way for a second. So if I had something like this and I have these seams between this, then if I was to put a texture on this, say I had a wood texture that was going all the way across, where the wood texture ends on one part here, it wouldn't map seamlessly across to the other surface because we've got this gap within the UV layout. Let's see if we can do a better way of showing you this. What I'm going to do is I've created another, I think I did it on this one, another checkerboard. And this is just one that I've downloaded, UV Checker Map. You can get lots of different examples of these, and some of these can be really useful. This is a good way to show the idea of seams. So where I have this going across, let's zoom in on this one here. So say this is this face. Okay. Where I have this going across here, note where this edge cuts through this B5, B6, B7, etc., etc. And you can see this on here. And this would be the same if this was a texture. If this was the end of wood or whatever texture we had, it wouldn't map across. There'd be this gap between it, then the texture would start again. So it wouldn't map perfectly through. Whereas if I had this and just move this in, I'm going to do this by eye. In fact, what I can do is I can move the pivot point with my D key again, like I can do with a mesh. D and V, I can snap to points. He says. Why are you not working? There we go. Don't know why that stopped working. And now my snap. There we go. Eventually got there D and V. So D to get the pivot point, V to snap. And now with that selected, I can just V snap onto this one. So now notice that this is going across perfectly from this square onto this little bit of the square there. So that would go perfectly across in terms of a texture. So that can be one of the things you could be looking at doing that. So let's do it on this one as well. So if we go around here, again, you can see the same issue where we have this going across. We have this H8 and then the I going across, and this is broken. It doesn't go across seamlessly onto the next one. So we're going to this DV. Let's move that pivot. Let's V snap that on there. That's now going across perfectly onto the next bit. Okay. Let me just click the checkerboard back on, and you can see even with the checkerboard you can see that as well on there. So there's another way we can do this. Let me just move these back where they were. Just to best show this. Let's just click this off for a second. And actually what I may do, no, I'll leave that on for a second actually. So what we can do is we can re-weld these back together as well. So if I right click and we're going to edge mode, so this is now the edges in our UV area, so it's our UV edges, not our edges over here. We can start re-welding these back together. And there's a couple of ways to do this. So up here I can go and to this cut and sew menu. We could merge those. We have a threshold on that. I don't generally use this, but we could stitch together. And that stitches them back. And that is a newer option. So you can see that brought the two together and stitched the middle on that. Grab these. We could also do a move and sew. And the move and sew will, again, do the same kind of thing. Now the nice thing about this is actually we don't need to bring these close together. We don't need to know where they connect. If I just click on this one here, this edge. So it's this edge here. And we can also select this in the the viewport as well. The area that it should be connecting to, you can see this on this line here, it changes color. So if I click on this, this is the edge that it should be connecting to from our original mesh. So another way to do this, which I use quite a lot, is to use another context menu. So if I shift right click, we have our major tools in here. And from here I could do a move and sew edges. Bring that in. Let's carry on. So I've got these all connected together. If I wanted my texture to go around the whole thing, let's click on this one here. Again, let's just shift right click, move and sew edges. Move that one in. And then I could always click on this one here. So this is my bottom face connecting to this. Shift right click, move and sew edges. And I've eventually got to essentially where I was before, just slightly different. So now within this, I only have one seam here around the entire area. So only one place where I would need to worry about this mapping in. So this is this one here, where the seam, I'd have to play around in the software, so in Photoshop, to actually get that so that is as seamless as can be. And then these areas here as well, I would have to play around with those. Although if there was something like a wooden crate, that would be a different panel anyway, so that wouldn't matter as much. So one of the things with seams is you try to put them where they're not going to be noticed, where they can be hidden, or somewhere where you would naturally get a seam. So if you were doing something like a jacket or a jumper or a shirt, then you would put the connections where there would naturally be a seam in the clothing, where it would be sewn together, and that you can get away with it that way within the texture as well. So the automatic unwrap gives us a good starting point, and then we can go in and actually start playing around, welding those things, moving and sewing them, connecting them back together, just to get rid of the seams. That's all we're really looking at doing there. Just as a note on this as well, we can actually break those connections. So if I wanted these to be separated again, say I want to separate this out for some reason, or the top I want to separate it out for some reason, if I click on an edge, again, we can either go to our cut and sew, or we can cut, or we can split, or I can shift right click and I can cut there. If I just go into my UV island, just double click on that, you can see we can break those apart again. So we can do quite a lot within the UV window. Just do that for now. As a final note, just for these UV basics, I've only scratched the surface so far, and there's a lot of things we can do with our textures, with our UV maps to best accommodate our texturing. But as a final note, if we were to take this out into another piece of software, we need to be able to take these UVs out. If we were going into something like Substance Painter, ZBrush, Mudbox, applications where we can paint directly on the surface, this doesn't matter as much. We still need to do the UVs, but the UVs are actually baked into our export, so into the FBX or the OBJ. We have our actual UVs within there. If we need to use this as a reference for where we're painting on it, for example in Photoshop, then what I'll often want to do is actually take these UVs out and bring them onto a layer, bring them in as a starting point, so I know exactly where I need to paint within, based on my mesh. And with that, one of the main things is, depending on the software you're going to, if I'm going into a game engine, then I need to keep my UVs within this first tile. So you can see as I zoom out here, we have all these different tiles. Okay, what we're wanting to do is use this one here. So they have numbers on there. So where you wanted to use a range from 0 to 1 on the U's and the V's. So this is our U, essentially our x-axis, our V's, our y-axis. So again, 0 to 1 area here, 0 to 1 here. We need to keep that, all these UVs within the area. So there's a couple of ways I can do that. One of the easiest, not always the quickest, but one of the easiest is to grab all my UVs, double click, grab those, and click on the scale tool, and then I could scale those down. Let's just re-weld these. Let's grab that, shift right click, moving so. Go into UVs, grab this, and with my scale tool, I can just scale that down and move that into place. Okay. Now, this isn't the best use of this UV area. We're trying to make the best use of all of this area here, but with something like this, this is really the only way we can bring this in. There's a lot of wasted space there, and that's a consideration again with UVs. But just in this introduction, this will do for now. We could actually rotate this round, so some of our options here as well. We do have some transform options. We have moves within the area, we have rotates as well. So what I could do with a rotate is I could set this to say 45 degrees, and I could just click on that, and then we could rotate that round. And actually you can get a bit more resolution in this. So let me just show you the original checkerboard. So essentially let's scale this out. So the smaller these squares are on our mesh from our UVs, the higher the resolution we're getting on each one of these individual faces. If I scale this in, scale these down, these get much bigger. And what we're doing there is we're not using the resolution as much on this object. So you really want these squares to be as small as you possibly can. So just by rotating this 45 degrees, we are able to actually get more resolution on there. The downside of that, more for something like Photoshop rather than Substance Painter, is that we would have to angle all of our textures. So if I brought a wood texture into this and it was a square texture, it was flat, I would have to start rotating that round to fit into these areas. So it all depends on what you want. What I'll do is I'll just rotate that back for now, and I do need to scale this in. Our checkerboard, by the way, if this UV area is going over one of the other tiles, then the checkerboard will stretch out to fit that. So having that checkerboard on within Maya itself is a good way of actually checking that you're only over this one UV tile there. So now we've got that in place. Click off. Excuse me. We can go to image and this UV snapshot option. So this is where we can save this out. If I go to this little camera icon at the side, I can go into the options. And generally, I save out as a PNG. Like that. We can set the resolution, whatever the resolution is going to be. So either a 1K or a 2K, 4K if necessary. image on that. I'll leave this as 2K for now. You are better taking it out bigger and then shrinking down. It's harder to upscale than it is to downscale. And then we can set a file name just here. So it's called out UVs by default. We can browse for our location. So I've actually set a project for this. So in my work folder in game art UVs. So that would save inside that folder, or you can just browse for a location yourself as well. I've talked about setting projects in the Maya Basics, and I do recommend doing that, but there you go. You can set that location manually. And here we have our UV area. So this is defaulting to our base tile set. So our 0 to 1 tiles, the 1 on the U and the 1 on the UVs. If you are taking out more, you can set a range on that. But as I've already said, that could be problematic in certain game engines. So once I've got those, I can just click apply. And it's just, I think it's giving me a thing about the name of it. Let's just call this Cube UVs. Make sure I'm just in object mode on that and apply. It's saying it's failed to open the output, but that's fine because I think it's saved out. I'll just check. So my other monitor here, it's documents, work. And I will bring this across. Actually, it hasn't. I saw the issue there. It was trying to create a folder called images before it was giving me my file name. So I just deleted that folder. So essentially, if I just undo that, we had this folder there. And it wasn't creating that folder. It couldn't find the folder because I hadn't actually created it. So by deleting that, there, and then clicking apply, overwrite that, that's absolutely fine. And there I have my cube UVs there. Okay, if I just open these, bring this across so you can see my UVs. So what I could do is take that into Photoshop, and then I could start painting over that and bring that back into Maya, and the textures will be laid over this cube exactly as I want them to be. So that's just an introduction to UVs over a couple of tutorials. And I say they are just the basics. I have just scratched the surface, but it should give enough for you to be starting using UVs within Maya.